You say no, and you just put your phones down. I'm going to ask you to tell the tale of Jordan DeMay.
Sure.
It's not a tale. It's a really sad story and a tragic one.
Yeah. Jordan DeMay was a pretty typical teenage boy. He lived in Marquette, a city in Upper Peninsula in Michigan. He was a football star, a basketball star, really good looking, really popular, had a girlfriend, lived with both his mum and his dad, was one of the most popular kids in school. Teachers loved him, football coaches loved him, his girlfriend loved him. And then one night in March of 2022, he said goodbye to his girlfriend, kissed her goodnight, went home before his 10 p.m. curfew, as usual. And on his way home, he got a message from a teenage girl on Instagram called Danny Roberts. And that message just said, hey, this is pretty normal for a popular kid who's regularly featured in the local newspaper for his sporting successes to be contacted by random girls on social media. It happens a lot now. You know, she may have been a stranger, but on her Instagram profile, he could see all of her photos, he could see all of her friends, and they actually shared mutual friends. And I think teenagers today have this safety net. They feel like social media is a safe place, and that, you know, looking at an Instagram profile, you know who you're talking to. But sadly, that is not the case, and this story tells us why. So Jordan was contacted by this young woman. They started a conversation. They were talking about school life, pretty normal topics, and then she turned the conversation flirtatious. She started to flirt with him. She then sent him a naked photo and asked him to play a game. She wanted to play sexy pics. So that was her sending the nude photo first. That kind of threw him off, I guess, and put him in a position of feeling like this was someone he could trust, that they were in this private conversation. He responded by sending his own nude photo, and as soon as that, the blackmail started. 6 hours after they first started messaging, he took his own life.
And he took his own life because of the concern over what would happen if these pictures got out. That was the blackmail. He indeed sent money. They wanted more money. And what happened?
Yeah, I think ultimately he took his own life because of the pressure these blackmailers placed upon him. Initially, the agreed upon amount was $300. He paid that, he sent it to them, and then they came back asking for more. They wanted $800. And at one point in the message exchange, he sends them a screenshot of his bank account, and it had $55 in it. He's a 17-year-old kid, and he says, I can't pay anymore. And they say, no deal. And they keep pushing and say, if you don't give us more money, we're going to send this to all your friends and family.
And it turns out, as your reporting shows, Jordan's story, absolutely tragic. The repercussions of that still playing out. But he's not the only one.
He is not the only one. The FBI have been aware of more than 12,600 victims of this crime across North America. We know more than 24 teenage boys have taken their own lives after falling prey to this specific scam.
The financial motivation and then kind of the evilness, if you will, of these individuals. How are they getting caught? Because they are getting caught, correct?
I mean, in the few cases where they have been caught, law enforcement have been able to track their identity through their IP addresses. So that's where they've been able to file preservation request records to Meta or other social media platforms to try and find out who is really behind that account. And these scammers have become very effective at these catfishing strategies by hacking into these Instagram accounts, taking control of them, weaponizing them in order to coerce that nude photo and then blackmail.
It's just amazing, like, going back a second, within 6 or 7 hours, all of this happened, and it's playing out over and over again, which doesn't leave necessarily a lot of time for law enforcement unless somebody reaches out or a student feels comfortable enough to reach out to a parent. But you think about, we all know teenagers in general and teenage boys, like, they're not likely to reach out. Has any of them, like, in the process, stuck in it, have reached out to an adult or law enforcement? Have we heard of anything like that yet?
Carol, I think that this crime is so much bigger than we actually imagine it to be. Those 12,000 cases are largely underreported. I don't know how many people have been affected, but the FBI says this is touching every neighborhood across the country. Some parents who have had their children die and have spoken publicly in the past, including a South Carolina state representative, he talked about his son's death, and he's been contacted by hundreds of children in the moment of crisis saying, please help me because what happened to your son is happening to me.
There's a really poignant moment in your piece where he talks about leaving his cell phone on at night so he can answer those calls. And I believe, Olivia, he said he's gotten hundreds of them.
Yeah, he's received over 200 phone calls.
So I want to say Jordan's story continues because the tech companies, and we'll talk more about the tech companies a little bit later in our program, but the tech companies play a big part in your piece here. Talk to us about what happened. Meta Platforms, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, actually has this portal where law enforcement agencies and agents can go and make records requests. What happened when a police officer, just hours after finding out about Jordan, went to do that?
So usually when you file a preservation request through the platforms, through this law enforcement portal, you have to provide a court order signed by a judge. Essentially, it's like a digital search warrant. The detective in this case wanted to file that preservation request as an emergency order to say, let me sidestep the court order that's going to take a while to get access to. Just give me the data on this particular Instagram account. That's the Danny Roberts account that was messaging Jordan DeMay, because, as the detective put in his request, he thought other children's lives were at risk. He told me he was at the mercy of the platform. He couldn't do any more other than ask them for the data. Who is this person? What's their IP address? What's their email address? Meta responded and said his request did not rise to the level of an emergency and told him they wouldn't give him any information without a court order. So he went and got it, and it took a few more days. It took a lot longer, but he did get that data. And when he did read that message exchange between Jordan DeMay and Danny Roberts, he said he had to read it twice because it was so shocking and disturbing for him. I've done a lot of interviews with law enforcement around the harms of social media. This is the first story where multiple seasoned detectives and FBI agents have cried.
Yeah, I mean, just the level, the conversation itself, I feel like how quickly, and it just seems like there's just no sensitivity at all by the individuals themselves and understanding that they're dealing with kids, right, ultimately. We want to come back and talk some more because we do think about in a year where it feels like social media, once again, is very much on the radar of a lot of regulators, certainly in the United States and around the world. But just curious to talk a little bit more about what they are saying and then kind of where we go from here to get around this. We are talking with Bloomberg Businessweek investigative reporter Olivia Carville. It is about her cover story of the upcoming new issue of Bloomberg Businessweek. It is also the Bloomberg Big Take on the Bloomberg Terminal today.
Yeah, you can read the story at Bloomberg.com/Businessweek and, of course, on the Bloomberg Terminal. Again, a most read story as of now. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 Newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. The U.S. Supreme Court has voiced some concerns about a criminal charge levied against hundreds of January 6th Capitol riot defendants as the justices weighed a case that could affect the election interference prosecution of former President Donald Trump. Justice Neil Gorsuch focused on the 20-year prison term in the law.
The sit-in that disrupts a trial or access to a federal courthouse qualify? Would a heckler in today's audience qualify, or at the State of the Union address? Would pulling a fire alarm before a vote qualify for 20 years in federal prison?
An attorney for one of the January 6th defendants argued that the law should not apply unless the obstruction of an official proceeding involves a document. House Speaker Mike Johnson's job in new peril. The second Republican now saying that he will join an effort to unseat the Republican leader. Kentucky Republican Thomas Massey says he told colleagues in a closed-door meeting that he supports Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's move to oust Johnson from the speakership. Johnson says he's not going anywhere.
I am not resigning, and it is, in my view, an absurd notion that someone would bring a vacate motion when we are simply here trying to do our jobs.
Johnson says the move hurts Republicans. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warns the U.S. will strengthen its sanctions on Iran within days after the nation's recent attack on Israel.
We don't preview our sanctions tools, but in discussions I've had, all options to disrupt terrorist financing of Iran continue to be on the table.
Yellen's comments came during the International Monetary Fund's spring meetings today. Global news, 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
Breaking news first. Iran fired more than 300 drones and missiles at Israel over the weekend.
Almost all were intercepted before they reached Israeli airspace.
This is a declaration of war. Middle East is on the brink. This was a humiliating defeat for the Iranians.
We don't want to see this situation escalate further. There's no question that this is a very, very volatile situation.
For the latest headlines from the Middle East, stay with Bloomberg 1130. Context changes everything.
This is the Bloomberg Black Business Beat. The black jobless rate climbed sharply last month, raising alarm bells for both the black population and the economy at large. Bloomberg Federal Reserve and labor market reporter Katerina Saraiva says black women took the biggest hit, the likes of which we haven't seen since the early days of the pandemic.
Black women lost 181,000 jobs in March, so that was a net job loss of a pretty sizable number. It's actually the biggest monthly decline since April of 2020, which of course was the height of the pandemic.
The latest black unemployment figures are sizably larger than that of the white population, which held mostly steady.
This rate for black workers is effectively recessionary. Like it's really not a good level.
I'm Bloomberg's Justin Milliner on the Black Business Beat.
I'm getting vaccinated with Prevnar 20, a Pfizer vaccine.
So am I, because I'm at risk for pneumococcal pneumonia.
If you're 19 or older with chronic conditions like asthma, diabetes, COPD, or heart disease, or are 65 or older, you are at increased risk for pneumococcal pneumonia. Ask your doctor or pharmacist about Prevnar 20, pneumococcal 20-valent conjugate vaccine. It can help protect you against pneumococcal pneumonia in just one dose. Even if you've already been vaccinated with other pneumonia vaccines, Prevnar 20 may help provide added protection. Prevnar 20 is approved for adults to help prevent infections from 20 strains of the bacteria that cause pneumococcal pneumonia. Continued approval may depend on a supportive study. Don't get Prevnar 20 if you've had a severe allergic reaction to the vaccine or its ingredients. Adults with weakened immune systems may have a lower response to the vaccine. Side effects include pain and swelling at the injection site, fatigue, headache, muscle, and joint pain. For full prescribing information, please call 1-855-213-2138 or visit Prevnar20.com.
Why just listen to Bloomberg Surveillance when you can also watch us live on YouTube? I'm Lisa Mateo.
And I'm Tom Keene. Join us weekday mornings along with Paul Sweeney and Michael Barr starting at 7 a.m.
Head to the Bloomberg podcast page on YouTube to hear and see the smartest voices on global markets and investment.
Make Bloomberg Surveillance an essential part of your morning routine weekdays from 7 to 10.
Visit the Bloomberg podcast page on YouTube and click on the live feed to join us today.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast, a conversation with Pedro Pizarro, Edison President and CEO on power demand.
Who's stalling is electrification in places like California, more broadly across the country, but I think we're more leading edge there. It is data center growth, which we've read a lot about that. And then it's also the repatriation of manufacturing. The bipartisan infrastructure law is working, and it's bringing back a lot of manufacturing into the country, and that's another source.
Oh, interesting.
So can you, being your company and your industry, can you handle that increase in load?
Yes. There will be some, yes, and there will be some bumps in the road, right? It's not the first time in our history of the industry we've seen this, right? Rural electrification, air conditioning load. So we've lived through these periods. It's been the last 15 years or so that it's been fairly flat. So how do we handle it? In the near term, right, you see a lot of focus of utilities working in their various regions, power companies working with regional transmission organizations, and working with customers too, make sure we're using every tool available. Demand-side management is important. Energy efficiency is important. But so is making sure that we can maintain and in some cases expand existing resources. And ultimately, we need to add new resources to the system.
How do you pay for that? Because as yields have moved higher, stock moves lower, and then it's more expensive to borrow. How do you do it?
Well, it is an investment in infrastructure that's needed, and this is an industry that's been investing for a long time. Our members at EEI have invested over $1 trillion over the last decade on infrastructure, $168 billion last year alone.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Hey, it's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. A number of developing after-hours stories. We begin with earnings out of UAL. United Airlines Holdings has slashed its aircraft delivery expectations for the year. There's a federal safety review, and the delayed arrival of a key airplane model slow the carrier's near-term growth. Also, seafood restaurant chain Red Lobster is mulling a Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing as it looks to restructure its debt, this according to sources. Down day for the S&P 500 index today, falling 10 points to 5,051. We had the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 61, a gain there of 0.1%. The Nasdaq Composite Index down 20, a drop today of 0.1%. 10-year yield today at 4.66% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.98%. Spot gold today, we had an ounce of the precious metal advancing little change, up by about 0.1%. 23.83 on gold. West Texas Intermediate crude oil today, 85.33 a barrel, down by 0.1%. So again, did turn out to be a mixed day for the U.S. stock market. The Dow higher, S&P lower. This on a day when we heard from Fed Chair Jay Powell. Jimmy Lee is the CEO at Wealth Consulting Group, and he was a guest right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
So what Powell did say today is he still believes the base case is that inflation is coming down. And I don't think that the Fed's going to raise rates like some people are thinking. I do believe we're going to get some cuts. I'm not sure how many at this point, but if inflation data does come in better in the second half of the year, then I think that the Fed wants to cut sooner than before, right before the election.
Jimmy Lee of Wealth Consulting Group. Again, recapping here, the Dow higher, S&P lower today, the S&P down by 0.1%. And one more time, checking UAL after hours, the shares are advancing up now by just about 5%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. We do want to continue with this week's Bloomberg Business Week cover story that will be in the new issue of Business Week out later on this week. The story is about scams, which the FBI calls sextortion, and has become one of the fastest growing crimes targeting children in the United States. We continue with Bloomberg Business Week investigative reporter Olivia Carville.
Olivia, I want to talk a little bit about the tech platforms here. Instagram is owned by Facebook parent Meta Platforms. You mentioned Snap earlier. Snapchat owned by Snap Inc. Talk to us a little bit about the platforms this is happening on and the role that the tech companies play.
So the platforms first became aware of sextortion as an issue in mid-2022. And since then, they have taken a lot of action to try and address this issue. Meta, for example, sends sextortion-focused safety notices directly to young users of the platform. They also use AI to try and detect suspicious accounts. Say, for example, a predator hacks into the Instagram account of someone based in the US and they're over in Lagos, Nigeria. The shift of that IP address could send out a red flag that Meta would then be tracking this account to see if anything suspicious happens. And just last week, Meta announced they're going to be automatically blurring nude photos sent through its platform. But even taking those steps, this crime is still occurring and will still occur. And I think that's because these bad actors are savvy. They know how to get around any kind of guardrails the platforms put up, because social media is so ubiquitous in children's lives now. Everyone is on it. They want to promote this beautiful life they all live. They want to show that they're friends with hundreds, if not thousands of other people. So they get a friend request from a stranger and they accept it.
That's amazing. But I do think we've become desensitized. Whoever thought, and okay, I'm taking off in a little bit of a direction, but you would get into a stranger's car pretty regularly. And I think about Uber, like we've just kind of accepted this idea of strangers, but they feel kind of familiar and we're okay because the company says they're okay, basically. Tell us about the two bad actors in this story who were ultimately responsible.
Well, it's kind of a network of bad actors over in Nigeria, along the Ivory Coast, and other countries in Africa, where they are creating scripts of how to blackmail kids and sharing them on other platforms like TikTok and YouTube. This is an industry-wide issue. It's not just one social media platform facing this problem. It's right across a number of them. So